All right, well, welcome to session 2 of Mr. Womack's PowerPoints. This is going to be labor and unions during industrialization. And for the last few days, we've been talking about the Gilded Age and industrialization and some of these wealthy business owners who became very, very, very wealthy from really just trampling on their workers and taking advantage of their workers. Remember, there was very little government regulation during this time period, so big business could do what they wanted in terms of their business, anything that benefited them, and they did not have to really worry about their workers. So this week we're going to talk about labor unions during industrialization, kind of the labor movement in general, how the working people kind of fought back against big business and the things that they were doing. All right, so this lecture is going to be a little bit different. I have a lot of pictures that I want you to look at, so a lot of observations. So go ahead in your notes and just write working conditions, what do you see? So I'll give you a second to write this question. And then I'm going to show you a series of pictures. And what I want you to do is just notice some specifics in the pictures. These are going to be pictures of working conditions during this time period. Okay. All right, so here we go. All right, so take a look at the picture. Some of the things that I want you to notice are the machines in general. Now notice these machines. Today, if you see a machine like this, you're going to see guards around all of these fast-moving belts. You're going to see some of these low-hanging lights here will have some type of protective cover. They probably wouldn't be this low. I mean, notice this one's as low almost as this machine here. The workers really aren't wearing a whole lot of protective gear. Today, if you work around any kind of machines, you have to wear, obviously, a lot of safety gear. Okay, another one here. Notice again the fast-moving belts that you can see. And really the only safety equipment they're wearing is, you notice the women all have their hair up and are wearing hats. Oops, they're wearing hats. So that's because women in this time period have long hair. You have these super fast moving belts. If their hair's not put up and it gets caught in one of those belts, they're going to have a really bad day. All right, next couple of pictures are about mining. And this shows kind of a picture of a mining town in the graveyard and then the cemetery right outside the town, because so many people died in these mines. And it's still today a very dangerous job, one of the most dangerous jobs in America. But imagine how it was during the Gilded Age when there was zero regulation. So let's look at some pictures of these miners. Picture here, a group of miners about 2,000 feet underground. All right, another picture here. Now check out this elevator. These are three really big guys getting in this elevator here. It's not very safe. There are no sides to this. Just imagine if this elevator got stuck about 1,000 feet underground. They would be pretty much out of luck. Notice what they're using also for lights, these lamps here that had open flame. And again, you're underground. You have open flame. You know, when you're underground, you can hit pockets of gas or other things that are flammable. All right, next part here is women and children in the workplace. So let's take a look at some of the women and children. Most of these pictures that you're going to see here are of kids, and we haven't really talked about this yet, but this was a time period of child labor, and again, very little government regulation. Today we have regulations, and children this young, as you can see in this picture, cannot work. Even kids your age, 15, 16, 17, by law are limited to a number of hours per week. And during the Gilded Age, during this time period, they would hire kids like this because they could pay them a much, much cheaper wage. You know, you hire an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, you don't have to pay him as much as you pay an adult. Another reason they would hire children like this, I mean, look at these kids. They look like they're maybe 7, 8 years old, and they're standing barefoot on some of these machines with fast-moving belts. And these kids, had obviously small hands, and so they could fit their hands into places maybe that adults couldn't. Maybe the machine gets jammed or stuck, and they could put their hands in and unjam the machine. But I want you to think about this also. So these kids are standing on these machines, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. Most kids this age need naps. They need a lot of sleep. I mean, you think about a kindergarten when you took a nap during the day. I wish we could still do that. It'd be great. But these kids are, at that young age, and they're working, some of them working 10, 12, 14 hours a day. So imagine the working conditions here. These kids fall asleep. Imagine one of these kids fell asleep, falls into this, fast moving machine. Children were killed all the time because of these things. All right, 6-year-old girl here working in the mill. And think about this too. You guys probably have siblings or nieces and nephews who are 6. Imagine their attention span. Imagine them working in a factory like this for 10, 12 hours a day. Kids this young aren't really made to do that. All right, you see this little girl here. So notice what's missing. Notice she only has one pigtail. That's because most likely that other pigtail was hanging low and got caught in one of these machines and ripped it out. That happened very frequently. And I know it's kind of hard to see, but if you can look at her hands, you can see her hands. Notice how they're very calloused and very white. That's probably from dry skin. And think about kids. Again, kids have different skin than adults, much more tender skin that they have. And so this did a number on their little hands. Another little girl here, probably 6, 7. Again, think about the attention span. Think about, a kid that's this young. They're thinking about playing, and they're thinking about other things that adults aren't. Another picture here, a couple of little boys. Notice how most of these tasks that they had them doing were pretty menial tasks. They weren't difficult. This wasn't difficult work, and so that's why they were able to pay them a very low wage. All right, another picture here. A lot of these guys look probably your age. They look like teenagers. It doesn't look very safe. Notice how they're standing on some of these tables, and you have some of these pipes that are hanging down low. It just doesn't look like a really safe place to work. All right, another picture here. This is back to some of the coal mining, and this is a kid, I would say, he's probably 12, 13. And notice he has, for light, he has a candle. Okay, so again, think about the picture that we saw earlier of some of these coal miners who had open flame in their lanterns. Open flame in this candle. You go down, again, 1,000, 2,000 feet underground, you could very possibly hit pockets of natural gas or other things that are very flammable. And so it was a very, very dangerous job. And notice this kid. Look at his face. He looks like an older man. He's worked probably for the last 4 or 5 years of his life, hard labor. All right, picture here. These boys that are working here, they're called breaker boys, and basically what their job was the coal. When the coal came in, they had to separate the coal from the rocks. And it was a very demanding job. Notice how they're sitting and they're bending over, leaning over. And notice the boy to the right here. Notice what he's holding. Okay, notice this here. I guess this was kind of a switch where he would move, that the coal would move and it would drop some more. So when they'd finished, he would pull that lever and they would get more. And so it was this constant. Notice how they're older and they're just looking over them. So imagine guarantee these kids were not very nice to these younger kids. And again, if you're the boss, you're going to tell these kids, I want as much work out of them as I can get. So they're probably going to be prodding them to work faster and work harder. Another picture here. A lot of kids. This is a textile mill. You notice the textiles are most likely making clothing. This is cotton, a cotton factory. All right, another picture here. Fermit Owens, 12 years old, can't read, doesn't know his ABCs, said, yes, I want to learn, but I can't when I work all the time, been in the mill for 4 years. So been working since he was 8 years old, cannot read, has zero education, and so you can imagine this kid, his life is destined to just working in a menial job in a factory for the rest of his life. You guys complain about going to school, but these kids would die for a chance to go to school. All right, let's look at a couple of political cartoons. These are some political cartoons from the time period that's showing child labor and obviously the greed, as you can see here, from kind of the slave, oops, the slave owner here. This is supposed to be on a slave ship. Notice the children are depicted as slaves. Another one here, big business. Anytime you see a really big fat guy with a top hat and a cigar in his mouth, that's usually showing you that that's big business. Notice he's in this little chariot, and the children are like beasts of burden, almost like horses or mules. Child labor exploitation. Notice the kids look very tired. There's a dollar sign there. All right, so now let's look at women. Women in the workplace. Some of the jobs that women had, as you can see here, these were canning vegetables. And this picture usually gets a laugh from some of my students, but it's actually not very funny. These kids are probably your age. Again, they're 15, 16 years old, and they look pretty rough. As you can tell, their clothes look dirty, their faces look dirty, they look really tired, I guess except for that girl on the far right. She's the only one smiling. Girl in the middle looks pretty upset, looks pretty mean. These women would work 12, 14-hour days, 6 days a week, and they would usually live on site, and that's all they did. They worked manual labor every day, all day. So you can imagine the life of just a poor immigrant or anybody living in America who had to work in these conditions. And remember, workers had no rights. Okay, laissez-faire, free enterprise system that we had, the government was hands off and let business owners do pretty much what they wanted. Another picture here, women sewing in a garment factory. Now notice how close together they are. They would cram as many workers as they could into these small buildings. And again, there was no fire codes. There was no, usually there was one way in and out. Sometimes there wasn't a fire escape. So, they're working in a 10, 12, 20-story building. Imagine if there's a fire. And that's what we're going to see next here. All right, so I'm going to pull up a video clip for you. It's about 6 minutes, and this video clip is about the Triangle Shirtwaist fires. This was a business in New York. Triangle Shirtwaist were women's tops. They called them shirtwaist at the time, and these women would be working in the factory. And in this particular case, they packed women very, very tightly into this building to work, and there was only one way in and out. And they did that because they wanted to check the girls' purses to see if they were stealing any fabric. So it was a really slow process to get them in and out of this building every day. Well, there's a fire that's going to be started, and it's going to catch the building on fire, and there's going to be a lot of women that are killed. So I want you to watch this. As you're watching the video, you can pause it throughout, but I want you to take some notes as to what's happening, and I want you to notice just what happens in the incident, what causes the incident, and then what are some of the effects of the incident. In other words, what things are going to change as a result of this incident. Okay, so here we go. Let me pull the video up. All right, come on. All right, give me just a second here, guys. I'm going to pause it, so I'm not sure what's happening to my video.
More people arrive with it. By 1900, nearly 4 million women are working in U.S. cities. In just 40 years, that figure has more than quadrupled.
By 1900, nearly 4 million
Urban
women
factories
working in
are
New York
pounding
City.
out 75% of all
In just
consumer
40
products
years,
in the
that
U.S.
figure has more than quadrupled.
Places like this, modern
Urban
steel
factories
frame
are
buildings
pounding out
equipped with
75%
all the
of
latest
all
technology.
consumer products in the U.S.
Otis electric elevators, Bell
Places like
telephones,
this,
Singer
modern
sewing
steel frame
machines.
buildings equipped with all the latest technology. Otis electric elevators,
But packing so many
Bell
people into
telephones,
tall buildings
Singer sewing
is a
machines.
disaster waiting to happen.
But packing so many people into tall
The United
buildings
States is
is a
hurtling
disaster
into the
waiting
modern
to
age,
happen.
symbolized by megacities rising up all across the continent.
The United States
By
is
1909,
hurtling into the
Americans are
modern
spending
age,
nearly $23 billion
symbolized
a
by
year
megacities
on
rising
ready-made
up all across
clothes.
the continent.
This factory is
By
producing
1909,
12,000 garments a
Americans
week,
are spending nearly
known as
$23 billion
shirtwaists.
a year
They're the
on
latest
ready-made
fashion for
clothes.
the working woman.
This factory is producing 12,000 garments a week, known as shirtwaists. They're the
New York
latest
City,
fashion for the working woman.
March 25th, 1911. 4:45 p.m. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory,
New York City,
8th floor.
March 25th,
260
1911.
girls work here,
4:45
most of
p.m.
them
The
teenagers.
Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, 8th floor. 260 girls work here, most of them
Someone,
teenagers.
we don't know who, tosses a match or maybe a cigarette into the scrap bin.
Someone, we don't know who,
Eva
tosses
Harris,
a match
a
or maybe a
seamstress,
cigarette
smells
into the
burning.
scrap bin.
There's a fire,
Eva
Mr.
Harris,
Bernstein.
a seamstress, smells burning.
Production manager Samuel Bernstein grabs one of the 3 fire pails, but
Production
the fire
manager
is
Samuel
already
Bernstein
spreading.
grabs one of the 3 fire pails.
There's a mad dash for the exit,
The
but
fire
it is too
already
narrow.
spreading.
Only one at a time can pass through. It's been designed that way
There's
so
a
their
mad
bags
dash
can be
for the
checked for
exit,
stolen fabric.
but it is too narrow. Only one at a time
There's a
can
fire
pass
hose,
through. It's been designed that way so their
but it's
bags
not
can
working.
be checked for stolen fabric.
The only
There's a
way to
fire
warn the
hose,
floors above is through the switchboard 2 floors
but
up
it's
on the
not
10th
working.
floor.
Hello,
The only
switchboard.
way to warn the floors above is through the switchboard 2 floors up
10th
on the 10th
floor.
floor.
Fire. There's a fire.
Put me through to the 9th floor.
She drops the phone and runs to get help.
Fire. There's a
The
fire.
message never reaches the 9th floor. Samuel
She drops
Bernstein
the phone and
races
runs
up
to
the
get
main
help.
stairs to help the 160 workers
The
trapped
message
there.
never reaches the 9th
But
floor.
blocking the front door is
Samuel
a barrel of
Bernstein
motor
races
oil.
up the main stairs to help the 160 workers trapped there. But blocking the front door
On the 9th
is a
floor,
barrel of
flames
motor
are
oil.
already shooting through the walls and windows.
On the 9th floor, flames
The
are
girls
already
on 9
shooting
rush
through
to
the
the
walls
fire
and
escape,
windows.
but it's locked. Only 2 escape routes are left on the 9th floor.
The girls on 9 rush to
The
the fire
elevator
escape,
and the
but
metal
it's locked.
fire escape.
Only 2 escape
Kate
routes are
Weiner
left on
makes
the
it to
9th
the
floor.
elevator door, but she's lost her
The
sister.
elevator and the metal fire
Everyone was
escape.
knocking and crying for the elevator to come up.
Kate Weiner
Suddenly,
makes
the
it to
elevator came,
door,
and the girls
but
rushed
she's
in.
lost her sister.
I was searching for my sister Rose, but I couldn't find her. The flames were coming toward me, and I was being left behind. I felt the elevator was leaving the 9th floor for the last time.
She's the last person to get to the last elevator.
I felt the elevator was leaving the 9th floor for the last time.
She's the last person to get to the last elevator.
More than 100 girls are left behind to die. The only escape route left is the metal
More than
fire
100
escape,
girls
but
are
it
left
collapses.
behind to die. The only
Firemen
escape route
arrive
left
with the biggest ladder in
metal
New York
fire
City,
escape, but it collapses.
but it's 30 feet too short.
Firemen arrive with the biggest ladder in New York City,
4:58 p.m.
but it's 30
The
feet
girls
too
trapped
short.
on the 9th floor are out of options.
4:58 p.m. The girls trapped on the 9th floor desperation, they jumped.
5:15 p.m. The entire blaze is over in less than half an hour.
5:15
146 people
The
die in the
entire
Triangle
blaze
Shirtwaist
is
factory
over
fire.
in less than half an hour.
There's a trial, but the owners walk free.
146 people die in the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire.
It remains the deadliest workplace disaster in New York City history
Trial, but the
until
owners
September
walk
11th,
free.
2001. But
It
some
remains
good
the
does
deadliest
come out of it.
workplace disaster in New York City history.
This dramatic
until
tragedy
September
sparks a
11th,
wave of
2001.
reform. So you begin to get new restrictions
But some
and a
good
new
does come out of it.
conversation about what
This
to do to
dramatic
prevent this
tragedy
kind of
sparks a
tragedy
wave
from
of
happening.
reform, so you
But
begin to get
it did
new
not stop,
restrictions
of course,
and a new
that tragedy
conversation
itself.
about what to do to prevent this kind of
Unions
tragedy from
force
happening.
management to
But,
take
it did
responsibility
not
for the
stop,
lives of
of
their
course,
workers.
that tragedy itself.
The Life Safety Code, now used in all 50
Unions
states, is a
force
direct
management
result
to
of
take
this fire.
responsibility for the
It's why
lives of their
doors now
workers.
open outwards in public
The Life
buildings.
Safety Code, now
Why
used in
automatic
all 50
sprinkler
states,
systems
is a
or
direct
multiple
result of
exits
this fire.
are now the law.
It's why doors now open outwards in public buildings.
The
Why
U.S.
automatic sprinkler systems or multiple exits are now the law.
Okay. All right, so back to our
The U.S.
PowerPoint. All right, so let's talk about the video clip here. Hopefully what you saw was some of the things that caused this is they had a very large number of people in a small area. They had only one way to get in and out. Very difficult in a panic situation. The fire escape was locked. Fire escape wasn't working. Nothing was up to fire code because there was no fire code. I mean, this probably could have been put out if they had fire extinguishers or the fire hose would have worked. So let's talk about the effects of this or the changes that came from this. If you notice, now people started to talk about changes in the workplace, and this is why we have sprinkler systems in buildings now, and like he said, doors opened out instead of in. Other things like there's a room capacity. You notice there's always a sign on public buildings. You know, this building can only hold, this room can only hold so many people. So there's actually some good that did come out of this. But I wanted you to see just the working conditions during the time period. Okay. All right. So now let's look at our big question here. So I want you to think about it. I want you to write this question down. How did industrialization affect labor, labor being working, people who work, in the United States? So how did industry and industrialization, these things we've been talking about, and it was very quickly, how did it affect labor or workers in the United States? So go ahead and pause the video for just a second and answer that question. Okay. All right, so hopefully you've been able to answer that question. You might see a question similar to that on your quiz. All right, so now predict what needs to be done to solve these problems that you talked about. So take just a second, and I want you to think about that. Write some of the things down in your notes. What needs to be done specifically to solve some of these problems that's created by industrialization? All right, so hopefully you have some answers there. Now let's take a look specifically and see what happened. There was actually a labor movement in the United States. Labor movement meaning that the workers rose up and said, we want to change what's happening to us. We want to do something about this. All right, and so that's what we call a union. If you don't know what a union is just a group of workers who come together to fight for better pay, better working conditions, etc. So let's talk about the need for unions. One, of course, poor working conditions, which we've talked about and that you've been able to see. No benefits. You know, they had no benefits. They didn't have sick days. They didn't have medical insurance. They didn't have all of these things that by law companies have to have now. So let's look at the types of unions. The first type of union will be your industrial unions. And think about an industry. So this is a union that would unite all workers in a particular industry. So you have both skilled workers, people that had a skill, and unskilled workers. So an example here would be the railroad. Think about the railroad. You have people working for the railroad that actually are skilled, and you have some people that are just kind of manual labor workers, people that are unskilled. So an industrial union covers all of these people. And then you have trade unions. And trade unions are different than industrial unions because these are unions that limit people with only specific skills. So you could only be a skilled worker and join these unions. You could not be unskilled. So they were very specific unions. For example, if you were a machinist or you were an iron molder, a glass blower, a shoemaker, you had a specific skill. And I want you to think about this. Which of these unions do you think had more bargaining power? And hopefully you would say trade unions because these are skilled workers. Think about it for a second. If these workers aren't getting what they want and they demand whatever it is, more pay, shorter hours, better working conditions, and they threaten to go on strike or quit, if they're unskilled workers, the business owner probably wouldn't care. I'll just go get me more unskilled workers. There's tons of them out there. But if you're a skilled worker, those people are much harder to come by, so they have more bargaining power. So let's talk about union oppositions. Most corporations, big companies, were forced to negotiate with unions. Let's talk about why. What's going to happen is unions are going to use some techniques to companies are going to use techniques to keep unions from forming. So let's look at some of these. Number one, they would require workers to take an oath promising not to join. So if you worked for this particular company, you had to sign an oath and say, I will not join a union. Next, they would actually hire detectives. So they would hire detectives like you see the picture there, Pinkerton's National Detective Agency, where they would hire these people as kind of spies to come in and just talk to people and said, hey, have you heard anything about a union? I'm thinking about joining the union. And if people started talking about unions, then that person would go tell the boss, hey, so-and-so and so-and-so are talking about joining a union, and then they would be immediately fired. Thirdly, they would blacklist workers, and if you've never heard of this or you don't know what the term blacklist is, essentially what they would do if you were in a particular industry, when you were fired, the word would get out that you wanted to join a union or were trying to join unions, so no business owner would hire you. That's called blacklisting. And then, of course, number four is they would hire strike breakers. So if they went on strike, they would hire people to stand in their place. These people are called scabs. They would stand in their place and they would work until the strike would break. Okay. All right, so let's talk about some of these strikes. So when workers weren't getting what they wanted, again, whether it was shorter hours, better pay, they would go on strike. And strike just means that they would stop working. So the first big strike was actually the Industrial Union of the Railroad. And what was happening is there was a recession at the time. The economy was not doing well. And so wages are being cut by most large corporations. It wasn't just the railroad. It was being cut by a lot of large organizations, corporations. And the railroad cut costs several times over a span of a couple of years. There was a nationwide labor protest. So this was, remember, this is an industrial union. So this is workers across the country. And they started to strike, about 80,000 people. And this was not the type of strikes that you see today where men just hold signs and kind of walk around. These were very violent. They smashed equipment, they blocked tracks, they brought their guns out with them. There were skirmishes back and forth between the workers and the local militia. And in this case, President Hayes, the president of the time, had to send the army out to restore order. And there was over 100 people that were killed on both sides. And I will tell you that this strike was not successful. Okay, they did not get what they wanted. And here's a picture here, just some of the places you can see. Now, most of these were in the Northeast. Again, that's where most unions are still today, actually. Some of the damage that was done in the other picture. All right, so, like I said, the railroad strike had failed. And because it failed, workers got together and said, we need to be better organized. And so this is where the Knights of Labor comes from. So the organizers are going to convince workers to get better organized. And they're going to create essentially the first nationwide industrial union, which was the Knights of Labor. Now, remember, the Knights of Labor was an industrial union. Which one has more power, more bargaining power? That's not the industrial unions. It's going to be the trade unions. We'll look at that one here in just a second. So before we do that, let's look at the goals of the Knights of Labor. These are some of the things that the unions wanted. They wanted an 8-hour workday. They wanted worker-owned factories. Worker-owned the factory, they would be more apt to work hard because they have an investment in that. They wanted to do away with child and prison labor, equal pay for men and women, safety codes in the workplace. Oops. And so these are just some basic things, and you think about today, I mean, we have all of these things, and they didn't have any of them at the time. So these are some of the things that they were fighting for. And we're going to skip through this and talk about the AFL. By the way, the AFL and the Knights of Labor, both flashcards that you did for last Friday, so hopefully you're somewhat familiar with this. So the AFL is started by a guy named Samuel Gompers, and remember, this is a trade union, so they're going to have more power, okay? And skilled labor only equals more bargaining power. And they had more tangible goals. These were not idealistic. They said this is specifically what we want. And these were things that they thought that they could probably get. So number one is fewer work hours. They wanted an 8-hour workday. They wanted better pay. And they wanted the business owners to recognize unions so that only a closed shop, as you can see there in parentheses, closed shop is when you only hire union workers. You don't hire people who will not be a part of the union. Okay, so they wanted everybody to be a part of the union. So how's the AFL going to help workers? It catered to the skilled worker, of course. What the AFL also did is they represented workers in matters of national legislation. So like a law being passed, they would go and they would talk to your congressmen and your senators, legislatures, and try to get things done. They also maintained a national strike fund, so a portion of your paycheck would come out. It was a small portion, but a portion of your paycheck would come out of everybody's paycheck until this strike fund. And if you ever had to strike, that's what you would get. You wouldn't get your full pay, but you would get enough to live on until the strike was over. They also mediated disputes between management and labor. So if there was a dispute between the business owner and the workers, these representatives would step in and help them make decisions. And of course, they pushed for closed shops. Remember, that is only union workers. And some more strikes here. Okay, so we have some questions. What was the role, I want you to write these down in your notes, think about them. What was the role of labor unions in trying to solve the problems of workers during industrialization? So what did labor unions do to try to help workers? And so I want you to support your point of view here, the effectiveness of labor unions in making changes for workers. So just talk here about working conditions and what unions are trying to do to help these workers. Okay, that's basically what I would like for you to do to close out. So do this to close out, and make sure you're taking notes. Make sure you bring these notes into class on your quiz.